Hello, everybody. It is Wednesday. It's 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is Student Affairs Live. I'm your host, Heather Shea Gasser, broadcasting live from 1 DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C. at the ACPA International Headquarters, where I will be later today attending a task force meeting of the Digital Technology and Student Affairs Task Force. So I was able to broadcast from here today. I am really pleased today to welcome my friends, Kathy Adams-Reister, Paul Shong, and Brian McDonald to the show to talk about our topic, Parents as Partners with Student Affairs. Student Affairs Live, as many of you know, is a part of the Higher Ed Live network. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with educational institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. If you've never watched the show before, you should know that Higher Ed Live is a series of professional development web shows and podcasts that are always free and accessible to you and your teams and your staffs at the archives at higheredlive.com, and also available as podcasts on iTunes. We just recently launched a new channel, Marketing Live, which is hosted by Amy Jorgensen and Tim Jones. And Marketing Live airs tomorrow on Thursdays at 1 Eastern. So you can be a part of our broadcast today by tuning in live, sharing your insights and questions. Please use the Higher Ed Live hashtag on Twitter. And I just want to give a quick shout out to my friend Kelly McCarthy, who is helping manage our back channel today. You can also receive updates about our live show dates by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. Today's show would not have been possible without the support of my home institution, Michigan State University, as well as ACPA, who's hosting me in their offices today, and our producer, M. Stoner. So on with the show. As I said, today's show we're going to be discussing the topic of parents and partnerships with student affairs. Many colleges and university campuses are currently in the midst of or beginning to start their orientation season. And while I recognize that the average age of college students is no longer 18 to 22, many of our residential and traditional campuses are currently being flooded with admitted students and their parents or guardians. Transition to campus, as we know, for our students is often challenging, but it's equally challenging for their parents, who are shifting their responsibilities from the primary director of their child's lives to a more sideline role. So I thought today we would talk about this transition process and how student affairs can effectively partner with parents. So I'm deeply grateful that Kathy, Brian, and Paul are joining me to have this conversation today. A little quick introduction about my guest. Kathy Adams-Reister serves as the Associate Dean of Students and Director of Parent and Family Programs at the University of Arizona. Say hi, Kathy.
Hello.
There's Kathy. Paul Shong is the Dean of Students at the University of Oregon. Say hi, Paul.
Hello.
And Brian McDonald serves as the Director for New Student Orientation and Parent and Family Programs at Rutgers University.
Hey, everybody.
All right. So thank you all for joining me. I know we're representing big institutions today, so we'll try and make those conversations as transferable across institutional types. But I think we're going to have a really interesting show. As I said, if you have questions for today's panelists, please send us a tweet. So to begin with, can all of you give us an idea of the scope of your campuses and the roles that parents play? Brian, do you want to start by talking about Rutgers?
Yeah, sure. So Rutgers is currently around 34,000 undergraduates, and so we have a very active history of parent involvement. For those of you not familiar with Rutgers, it used to be organized as several different schools for over 200 years of its existence, and about 8 years ago reorganized as one big Rutgers on our New Brunswick-Piscataway campus, which transitioned parent involvement from these very small communities to one big umbrella. And so it was definitely a big transition, a big culture shift. But currently, parents get an introduction to our university at parent and family orientation, and we have a real revamped Parents Association that has been playing a really active role over the past 2 years, and we involve them in everything from major events to volunteering opportunities to helping us on Facebook during a hurricane. So we involve them quite a bit.
Great. Thanks.
Great.
Paul?
The University of Oregon is about 25,000 students. We are in the middle of our orientation program right now. It's called Introduction, Go Ducks. And we have a lot of different activities, a very strong parent-family association, which is interwoven into the orientation activities. And the Division of Student Affairs plays a very strong role in working with parents and talking about resources that are available here on campus and trying to involve parents throughout the year in different kinds of activities ranging from recruitment to actually being on campus for different kinds of celebrations with students. And also we do, if you join the Parent Family Association, all of the campus alerts and those kinds of things that are live for students get sent out to parents as well.
Great. Kathy, tell us about Arizona.
Sure. At the University of Arizona, we have about 38,000 undergraduates, and we have also a very active parent-family association. It has a long history. It's 30 years old on our campus, and it went through a major shift and revision to focusing on more outreach and education and not just fund development about 8 years ago. So we have a pretty significant role working, welcoming parents in new student orientation. We also have ongoing programs throughout the year. We have an active volunteer parent advisory board. We do fund development that helps offer grants to support different services on campus, and try to also look for ways for parents to be involved out in the communities where they're living with other parents in that area who also have students attending the university.
Cool, great. So it sounds like we kind of talked broadly about parents' involvement. Do you all want to specifically talk about orientation programs, since that's kind of the summer thing to do, and what best practices that you have incorporated from your campus, from national models or from the literature? Paul, do you want to start?
Sure. We have basically a 2-day program, and parents and students are invited. We try to separate the students from the parents and have different kinds of programs for each group. With the students, of course, we're really emphasizing development of peer relationships and helping students feel comfortable here at the university, getting them advised and registered, but also introduced to different services that are available and the kinds of activities that are available. With parents, we really emphasize wanting to develop a relationship, a partnership. We talk quite honestly about the kinds of things that we are encouraging them to talk with their students about. We talk very clearly about alcohol and other drugs, and also about concerns with regard to student safety on campus. We also really focus on the Family Educational Right to Privacy Act, FERPA, and how this shouldn't be something that inhibits the conversation between the university and university representatives and students and parents. So I think that one of the things that we do that really is, if you will, best practices or cutting edge is that we really do try right from the very beginning to talk about a relationship and how we want to work together to help students to be successful, with their parents. So it's a good conversation, and we've enjoyed it, and we've been told that the presentation helps minimize a lot of the concerning kinds of questions and issues that are raised later on in the year from families and parents.
Great. Kathy?
Sure. So at the University of Arizona, we have a 1-day orientation program. Part of that, in the morning, there's a welcome, and both students and parents spend time together meeting with the colleges. So the parents have a nice overview and information about our colleges and the academic experience the students can expect. They also have, they come and learn about different information and resources, and then in the afternoon we separate them. So the parents come to a parent session, and the students go to learn a little bit more about the university, how to access some of our systems. They hear from our campus police and our Dean of Students office about safety, and then they get their kind of initial schedules, have advising, and do change of classes, and then leave with their schedules. And in the afternoon, during that time, we talk with parents and really give them an overview to the resources of the university. We talk a lot about FERPA. We also talk about campus safety and, talking with their students that, they need to use their common sense and use their safety messages that they've been getting through their whole life to continue practicing that. And this summer we also have really included in the parent session, we've always included this in the student session, but we've talked about Title IX and consent, and asking parents to have a good conversation with their students about those kinds of topics, about alcohol and about, you know, what happens when you go out, and making smart choices and that kind of stuff, so that they're starting to hear that messages from their parents before they come here. We also introduce them to some of our great systems that we have. We have a system here as part of our U-Access system that's called Guest Access, that if the student gives permission, which is essentially a FERPA permission, the parents can actually get in and take a look at the end of semester grades, their academic schedule, they can pay their bills and all of that kind of stuff. So we walk through talking about those kinds of resources, which is one of the things I think parents are most concerned about is, you know, how am I going to know what's going on with my student? And they still have the ability to have access to that kind of information with their students' permission.
Great. Brian?
Sure. So at Rutgers, I think similar to some of the other folks, especially at a large university like Rutgers, we really do attempt to build that trusting relationship. I think a lot of parents sometimes, if they're thinking about not coming to orientation, they'll say, can you send me a packet of information? And we say, you know, we could send you a packet, but we can't send you a relationship. We can't send you that feeling. And I think that's what a lot of family members that leave feeling good about orientation. It's that biological feeling of safety. I have just visited this space where I am bringing my most prized possession, which is my student, my son or daughter, and I feel good about the day I just had. And so we really aim to achieve that, because we find that the other things that sometimes we focus on, the logistics, the information, the pieces about new relationship, and then some of the really heavy, logistical pieces of our complex institutions, those seem to fit and process a little easier once the anxiety has dissipated. So very similarly to the way we talk to new students, we try to inspire and motivate parents, remind them that by virtue of their students being here, they're becoming part of the most educated group on planet Earth. Less than 7% of the world's population possesses a bachelor's degree, and their eyes light up. Wow, I didn't realize that. So I would also say, with best practices, similar to talking to students, I could be on stage with the winning lottery numbers, but it's going to resonate more if it's coming from a peer. So in the middle of our parent orientation, we actually have our student orientation leaders who rotate through being behind the scenes, being orientation leaders, and then being family orientation leaders. We actually assign 6 to 8 of our family orientation leaders to about 150 to 160 parents each session. And in the middle, they share stories about how their relationship with their families changed during the first year of school. And that's where some of those issues about, partying, studying, transition, relationships, that's where that comes out through student voice, and it brings the house down. Parents are crying. Some of them have attempted to hire our students as public speakers. It's great. And I think that hearing that authentic voice allows it to frame for them. And I think we're also, because Rutgers is very large, one thing we do after our beginning is, myself and one of our staff members, we post our direct contact information, our direct phone line up there. And sometimes just that trust, knowing I can contact someone if something doesn't go right, alleviates a lot of those preemptive, I better call them because I'm afraid this might happen. Mm-hmm. And so we find that by just being out there and giving them that connection, sometimes they call less because they know we're there. So those are just a few of the things that we do. And it's a one-day program while the students are here 2 days and overnight. We mix them together sometimes, we pull them apart, and then sometimes the students see certain components that we stream via a closed internet connection to the parent orientation, so they can see the students interacting with the skits, they can see the students doing certain things, we can pan to the crowd. So those are a few things that we do.
How the live streaming idea is a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
You don't always want the parents in the same room. You want the students to have that space, but yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. We've thrown around the word FERPA a couple times, and I just want to make sure everybody who's watching the show is aware of what FERPA is, and we're going to talk about it a little bit in more depth, but FERPA stands for the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which applies to schools that receive funding under the Department of Education. So it's possible that FERPA doesn't apply to all institutions, but I'd say the majority, particularly of public institutions. And we're going to get into FERPA a little bit more in a little bit. We did get a question from Twitter, though. Charlie Potts, is a friend of mine, asks, how do you engage with parents of minors or students under the age of 18? And what kind of special considerations are needed for that population? Who wants to take that one?
This is Kathy. I can take that one. So at the University of Arizona, we talk a little bit about where if the parent has a minor, where that will come into effect. And for us, for almost all intensive purposes, they're going to be treated the same as a student who's not a minor. One exception is healthcare. So we do have a campus health service, and in order for them to be treated at campus health service, if they're under 18, they need parental consent. So we talk with parents about, even if it's only going to be a month or a couple weeks until their birthday, make sure you get in and get the consent signed or fill out the form and get it into campus health so that they can be treated. And then usually on our campus, the only other complication comes in is if a student happens to be arrested for something, because if they're arrested and they're a minor, then they have to be released to an adult. So then the parents are also involved in that process. But other than that, unless they're really young and we're having some conversations about that because of their age, they're treated pretty much the same as our over 18 or 18 and over students.
Okay.
I just wanted to add that our approach is very similar, but we do try to identify parents and students who are going to be minors and under 18, so that we can have a special conversation with them.
So I'm going to move on to my next question, which has to do with the often heard phrase to describe parents as the helicopter parent, so the hovering parent. They're overprotective, they're meddling in their child's lives. I've heard of students actually who still have their parents call them in the morning on their phone to wake them up. That would be a good definition of a helicopter parent. So, and we probably have all interacted with some of these students, right? In the program that I work with at Michigan State, we've seen a couple over the course of the summer. So how does your campus work to balance that partnership? We want to keep these parents involved. We want to also help the students find their own paths, make their own decisions without their parental intervention. Brian, do you want to start? Talk a little bit about this at Rutgers?
Yeah, I would, because again, I have a lot of, it's funny, we love hyperbole in higher education.
Yes, we do.
We have names for everything, and I find that if we were actually attributing the majority of our parents to the conversation, I have found that the overwhelming majority get it. They check in when they're not sure, and they're very forthcoming about positive feedback. It really is a small percentage when you look at the overall scope, that to an extent where it really is disruptive. And I think the challenging part is it can only take one or two really ambitious folks who can really kind of set your week back and make you very busy. But I have found that, again, it does start with that transition. And it's why we really try to make sure parents do attend those spring admit programs, and especially orientation, because we definitely see a distinct difference in behavior of parents who attend orientation and people who do not. Sometimes I'll just ask if I'm on a difficult phone call, oh, did we meet at orientation? No, I didn't go to that, because I think they do get the message. And we start out, we show, I'm sure everyone's here has seen probably 6 or 7 years ago by now, there was a 2020 series about the helicopter moms, and we show this mom who really is over the top and very active. And we show that video, and a lot of them look at it and say, wow, I don't want to be like that. And so we start the conversation that way. But when it does reach that, I always tell my colleagues, please send, if you have parents who are challenging, send them to me, because I think, again, a lot of times when you dig down deep, it's similar to student behavior, where a lot of those behaviors come from fear, come from anxiety, and just an uncertainty. And so I find that for me, my best practice in this area is to just listen first and really try to get at the root of what the issue is. And sometimes, again, it really is just a human emotion that is getting at some of these issues. I find that some of the more challenging situations that have been a little hard to bridge is when a lot of that interaction doesn't happen over the phone or in person, but on social media or using email accounts that are more generic. So one thing that I always try to do if I'm working from one of our generic accounts, or if it's a sensitive issue on social media, I sign it with my name, because a lot of parents, it humanizes the poster, it humanizes the person who's responding, because I think sometimes folks are not used to getting a reaction from a generic account, and so when someone actually responds, it humanizes it and says, oh, this is a person I'm talking to. But sometimes on social media, you will see sort of a situation that is kind of just dropped on a Facebook post. And sometimes that's challenging because we can't always tell the whole story if it's sensitive information. So, and I think where that reaches more of a sensitive area is when it comes to issues of safety. Because again, I think if folks are using their imagination and not getting a full story on maybe a little piece of information they read in a paper or from their student that is about a safety concern, that can just really send people into sort of that anxiety mode. But I think, again, if parents have a positive connection with us before an issue hits, that relationship is in place. And again, working with the student as well to always say, if there's an opportunity, why don't you pass this off to your student, have them come see me, and we'll work it out.
That's a great point. That's a really great point.
Yeah.
Paul, you want to weigh
I
in?
was just going to say I agree, and I think it's really important at orientation to establish those relationships and also to have the key people who are going to continue to talk with parents and people who are going to be interacting and have questions on behalf of their students. To meet all of us, I mean, we always have the director of the counseling center, and I give a presentation to parents. We give out our names, our addresses. We invite them to be in touch with us. My associate dean, Cheryl Eister, is always very, very prominent at orientation programs. And the other thing that we do is we also project ways, we give parents ways so that they can be involved. And we talk with them about what are reasonable questions, what are the kinds of responses that people can give you, and that, you know, we may not be able to talk specifically about your student's situation because of the lack of release, but we can certainly talk in general about different things that might happen and different approaches to use and so forth. We haven't had, to be perfectly honest, and I hope this doesn't sound naive, but we in the years that I've been here, there have not been that many of these disastrous kinds of conversations or situations with parents. Usually it goes very well, gets resolved well, and people, you know, especially if they've met you at the orientation program, you know, there'll be a different tenor in the kinds of conversations that they'll have.
Great. I've gotten a couple of other questions from Twitter, which I think are fabulous. I'm going to shoot to those really quickly. One of the questions has to do with what types of programs and resources do your campuses provide regarding bilingual parents, and how do you connect with students who, particularly their parents? Kathy, I know at University of Arizona there might be some specific resources there. You want to start?
Sure. So we are actually in the process on working on that. We know that's one of the areas where we aren't doing as good of a job as we can. So for us, we have some parent FAQs that we're in the process of posting in Spanish with some of the basic questions that we know that we get. So we're putting those up. I also try, as we hire staff, because I am not bilingual, and Spanish would be probably our second language here that we would get the most often. And so I try to be cognizant of that, and if it's possible to hire a staff member who, you know, is a Spanish speaker, that's always helpful. And actually I have the last 2 years I've had a graduate student who is able to speak in Spanish, which has been helpful at orientation. And then we also try to make connections with some of the other areas on campus that are serving students from different backgrounds who also might be speaking in different languages, and talk with them about, you know, what types of resources and services can we offer as part of that, and, you know, making sure that we're getting out as much information as possible. It's a little challenging because usually at orientation we don't present things in 2 languages. It's, you know, it's presented in English, but we also try to be really cognizant about having private or individual conversations with parents who might have more questions, and that's a lot of times when I'll see a question, and sometimes, you know, have someone that's interpreting or, you know, kind of having a conversation back and forth and helping with that.
Great. Brian or Paul, what do you all do for folks who are non-English speaking?
I apologize too. I think there's a lawnmower going on outside my office, so if it gets loud, I'll kick it over. Of course, I think one conversation, in addition to trying to make sure that we are thinking about converting a lot of our web materials to multiple languages, is, as many public universities are right now, our international populations are populations that we are engaging in a high level. And so I think in addition to the bilingual, it's also how do we culturally make sure that our policies are going to appeal to, make sense to, and be inclusive of folks who may be coming from outside of the U.S. And so those are big conversations going on. We partner with our international orientation area they do it during the last week of August. So those are conversations we're having too in terms of who should be going overseas. Is it just the admissions folks, or should student affairs and residence life folks be joining on that trip and building those relationships? And again, are all of our social media accounts accessible in countries? How do we bridge that gap and bridge time zones and things like that? Those are questions that we're trying to ask ourselves in addition to the language piece.
Great. Paul?
Yes, our approaches and our questions are very similar. And of course, we try to put as much as we possibly can in different languages on the web when we're talking about orientation and orientation activities. And then we ask people to identify themselves if they need possibly, or we should be providing to them somebody who can be an interpreter.
Great. Thanks.
So Heather, can I give a shout out for another institution? So I spent some time a couple years ago talking with the parent family staff at UCLA, and they actually, as part of their, I don't think it's an orientation program, it's like their visitation prior to orientation, they conduct sections in probably at least 10 different languages for parents at that session. Which is one of the things I think we would probably aspire to. I don't know that we currently have that capability right now to do that, but they have volunteers from around campus that will lead some of their orientation sessions for parents or their visitation sessions in different languages, which I think is pretty amazing.
That's great. That is awesome. So shout out to Diana Victa for that question. That was a great one. Another question that's somewhat related from Frederick Smith is about how you engage parents of students of color, LGBT students, women students, and just generally addressing all of the different types of students that are coming to our campuses today. I don't know if anybody wants to see, do you customize any aspect of orientation for those groups?
We have we're in the second year of a program called Community, which is an extended leadership, social justice orientation experience that's an extra couple of days for students who identify as LGBTQ or allies. And we advertise this program at Open House, and we advertise it in our new student orientation. And then we have issues of diversity and specifically LGBT student characters in our campus skits that actually even just a week ago sparked a lot of debate and conversation between parents at an orientation. So it was, I think, by just incorporating it into some of our more interactive components, we spark a lot of conversation, and again, just even if students are not ready to sort of self-identify or approach us, I think it sends that message to parents that this is a community where my students have these options. And then again, back to our student panel, some of our students do tell their own stories about identity and the college experience, and I think it allows parents to have some new language to spark conversations with their students.
Great. Kathy or Paul?
So I would say this is one of the areas that we have started to focus on at the University of Arizona to make sure that we're providing outreach and support to some of our underrepresented populations on campus and their parents in particular. And one of the big challenges is that the parents, first of all, don't always come to orientation because of the cost of the program. And so you have that, and then if there are language barriers, or are we kind of giving the right messaging, especially if it's a first generation college student. So it's one of the things that we're working on. We've spent some time talking with all of our different cultural centers on campus, including our LGBTQ affairs staff, and trying to get a handle on what do we think that the parents are asking for a need for support. And it's actually an area that I'm going to be doing some work and research on this next kind of semester to try and see and look at what best practices are across the country with doing that.
We've always we've had strong LGBTQ outreach programs. So students are invited to visit and learn about resources at the University of at the University of Oregon before they're thinking about applying and seeking admission. The other thing that we do here is we make the resources really obvious and available. They're incorporated into a very important student skit, and also they're set up in such a way so that if students want to pursue these resources, or if their parents want to learn about these resources, they're very comfortable to access.
Cool. So I was at an orientation session in my previous institution a couple of years ago, and I was at an evening kind of dessert with the dean activity, and a parent and I were talking, and she conveyed to me, this has just hit me as really profound. She's like, a couple of weeks ago, when my son was a high school student, I was being asked to sign permission slips for everything. I was being consulted on every aspect of his academic progress and his work in his high school. And she's like, I made most of the decisions. I mean, he was involved in that process, but now she arrived at the University of Idaho, and she's like, I have very little say. I'm being excluded, in fact, from this whole process of registering for classes, and my son even has to sign this special form for me to have any access to information. And she was just completely bewildered. And that transition was really abrupt and hard. How would you respond to this parent? I was like, wow, that was pretty explanatory as far as what parents are going through. Kathy?
Sure. So I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we face from that transition from high school to college. We know that we tell parents if they want their student to be successful and be able to go to college, they have to be involved in their lives. So we have parents who are pretty involved in what their students are doing. Then all of a sudden there's this magic wall that we put up when they come to our institution saying, oh no, we can't talk with you due to FERPA, and they need to start running their own lives. And I think one of the things that we need to realize as practitioners is that the view of adulthood is changing. So there's a new concept called emerging adulthood. And if you talk with parents and students, they will tell you that not all of them consider them, the student doesn't consider themselves to be an adult, nor does the parent consider the student to be an adult. However, in higher education, we want to treat them as adults when they come to college. So it's kind of a dilemma. And I think what I talk to parents about is, part of the transition is you helping your student learn how to manage their business, being a student at the university. It doesn't mean, for us at the University of Arizona, it doesn't mean they can't be involved, because we have some really good ways to give them resources and information. And my hope is with that, then they're kind of nudging their student of, oh, I saw this, did you take care of that? And being more of the reminder versus the doer on some of that information. And I think similar to something Paul said earlier is I am always happy to talk policy and procedure with a parent. I will never say I can't talk with you about that because of FERPA, because you can say, so what if? And I will go through that scenario and say, well, here are some possibilities, and talk about that. And I think the biggest thing is the parents want to know they have a way to get some information. They want to feel supported, and we offer that, with what we do at the university. And don't say, sorry, we can't talk with you until your student signs this. I mean, that's not the right answer. We can always talk about stuff. We just can't share specifics.
Right. Paul or Brian, how would you respond to that parent?
Well, I would say that we have policies that we have to respect and abide by, and we want to promote student growth and development. But that doesn't mean that students and parents can't talk. And I encourage them to continue to ask those same questions, to have the same sorts of interests, and to, at other programs that I've been associated with, and this one too, we do things that help students and parents to look at those issues that have to do with selecting courses and so forth. So I think the approach that I would encourage people to do is to acknowledge that they have that relationship. And I agree with Kathy that this is something that's natural for them, and we should take advantage of it. We should just say, talk about these things, do a program, for instance, afterwards saying, okay, your students have been registered, why don't we spend a few minutes and discuss what it is they've registered for and what concerns you might have about it. Be very clear about the drop and add policy and how that works, because in our case, students will have, and parents will have basically almost a quarter by the end of our introduction program and when the students first come to campus. So there's lots of time for students and for parents to interact and discuss the registration part. And I really need to emphasize too that, at least in my experience, registration is one of those things that I think parents necessarily sort of gravitate towards because they're familiar with it and they're used to doing it. And so I think that to try to make those processes clear and what the considerations are for parent family members is really important and alleviates some of that concern. The issues that are really important that I think we need to talk with parents about is the transition and what this might mean for them personally, as well as in terms of their relationship with their students.
Yeah, for sure. A couple other questions on Twitter. We have quite the active Twitter back channel today. Debbie Kolstad asks, do any of your schools specifically tell parents when to leave? When to leave? Goodbye.
At the orientation program or at the beginning of classes?
She doesn't specify, but I'm thinking probably at the beginning of classes. Like, how does that drop-off period look?
Well, we actually encourage parents to stick around. We create activities for them. The students will be moving into the residence halls, and something magical kind of happens. It's sort of sad for families, I think, but students want to move on and get to know their roommates and find their friends and start looking in fraternities and sororities and having a good time. So parents kind of get left behind, and we create alternative programs for them to do other things and to learn about the university, but also to have a good time too, and to understand the city of Eugene and also all the resources available at the university, and we'll take them to different kinds of activities around campus and in the community to sort of ease that transition, because it's I think it's a hard one for families, and their students will make that transition and kind of want to move on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would add, we have some parent send-off receptions on move-in day, and we really try to be intentional about inviting commuters as well. And those happen at several different parts of the campus. I think we probably would invite parents and family members into our stadium for new student convocation if logistically the parking wouldn't be so challenging. Because I remember my last institution at Boise State University out in Idaho. I remember I had started my job here at Rutgers, and I got a text from a dad who I knew really, really well. I knew his son from early days in high school, and he came from a challenging background, making it into that venue for the start of his college education. He was not supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to make it, so his dad sent me a text. I'm in the audience at convocation. This is amazing that I'm seeing my kid walk in here right now. Thanks so much. And so seeing them actually have that beginning of their experience can be really powerful and really emotional for the family members. But we do have those send-off receptions that say, okay, so your student is now doing this, here's your next stop, and then that's where we have deans of students advertise their resources. We remind them about Parent and Family Weekend, and we try to get them involved in some of the other things. But we do have special move-in day programs for them.
Yeah.
Heather, we actually have a Bon Voyage brunch to kind of signal this is our kind of wind down time, say goodbye time, and it sells out every year, and it's nice because we have a experienced parent from our board talk about that transition from high school to college and their experience with their student. Our fabulous parent Joel Lewis is going to do it again for us this year from my board, and it's a really kind of, I think, touching and special moment when they're talking about that. And then we kind of joke during orientation. So once we have the Bon Voyage brunch, it's time for you to say goodbye. Unless you're going to go to a resort or spa, and wind down, this is kind of the end, and your student needs to get on to their business. So we kind of try and do it with a little bit of humor too, to let them know that the students are going to start class and they need to focus on that.
Great. Another great question from Jenya Herndon asks, who's actually a high school friend of mine, asks that she's at an urban campus and she is looking to strengthen their family program. So any advice for non-traditional campuses or engaging engaging family programs at campuses where you have a high number of non-traditional students?
Well, my advice would be to really try to do everything that you can to highlight what it's like to be on that particular campus. You know, urban campuses have very special environments, and I would really focus on the support services, but also how to use different kinds of municipal sorts of resources. Take families for tours of the immediate community, and do things to help people feel comfortable with the fact that it is an urban campus, and that you have these different resources and assets available that might be different from a more traditional kind of environment.
Well, and having worked with non-traditional student programs on other campuses, sometimes it's a matter of making things family friendly, you know, involving kids in activities. So it's not just parents of college students, but students themselves who are parents, and involving their entire support system, which is often kids or partners or spouses, etc. Another question, just in with regard to timing. Annie Casson asks about how we treat spring admits as different to fall admits. You know, do you have any differences in your spring orientation programs or parent programs than you would for students who are coming in at the beginning of the fall?
We have several spring orientations. They're only a day long, and they're unique because they blend traditional first-year students, our non-traditional students, and our transferring population. But we still do include a parent component. It's one day. I think the challenges, again, are weather, if it's snowing, if it's challenging to get there. People have busy holiday seasons. And, you know, some of the schools, this happens at a lot of institutions, will not have spring students transfer in. They have to start in the fall. So it does take a little bit of extra effort, and I think it's the added message to the parents that just because your students are starting in the spring does not mean that they have missed everything. I think it's that encouragement. But we still do see you know, a good turnout for those populations, and again, they usually happen in January. So it's, again, trying to just be as flexible as possible, as open as possible, and putting in the extra effort to reach out, to maybe email that group a couple extra times and really engage them, because it can be a challenge.
Yeah. Kathy or Paul, anything you do in spring that's different from fall, or?
Very similar to what Brian has described. And of course, the emphasis is basically to try to participate in the most extensive program that's available, which is always going to be our summer program. But yes, we do have abbreviated kinds of programs that, you know, where we try to invite parents as well as students. And a large number of participants in those programs are going to be transfer students. So we have to really focus on those special kinds of experiences.
Great. So for me at least, and I think maybe for many of our students, although there's some generational stuff happening, college is a time of testing independence, right? So some students actually desire a lot less parental involvement in their own lives now that they're on their own. And often I think in student affairs, we're the ones who can kind of help students navigate that balance, and while also remaining connected to their parents. How do you, in your roles, kind of help students realize that and come to that learning piece where they can test their own adult decision making in a healthy way?
So I would say at the University of Arizona, one of the things that we do is we have a student-parent success agreement that we encourage students and parents to fill out, and it's navigating a lot of the things like how often should we talk on the phone, you know, how am I going to share grades with you, you know, how am I going to get spending money, and navigating through some of those things that are really part of that transition and starting to set the boundaries and navigate that relationship. You know, how often can I come home? If they live close enough to show up for a visit, how often should they visit? So part of it is we encourage them to use that tool. and to start setting those boundaries. And I think for the students, working with them, especially if they feel like their parent is being too intrusive, to try and have that conversation with them that, I appreciate your support, but can I let you know when I need something, versus you trying to preempt things, and really helping support them. And then if the parents, sometimes you'll get the parent who you can tell their students not telling them stuff and they're calling you to get information, just say, you know what, I would love to talk with you about this. We can bring your student into my office, we'll sign the FERPA release, and we'll call you together and have this conversation, so that the student has a little bit more control over what's going on.
Mm-hmm. That form sounds great, Kathy. Is that available as a link or something?
Yeah, it's a link on my website, so it's uafamily.arizona.edu. I think it's under our resources on there.
Okay, we'll find that and tweet it out.
Yeah.
That's great. Paul?
We do the same thing. I'm going to take a look at this form because I think that's a wonderful idea. But we present those issues to parents during their visit to introduction, and talk with them about having those conversations before bringing the students back in the fall, and talking about expectations with regard to communications, how frequently they're going to call, and be real honest about grade expectations and how frequently they want to sit down and talk about, and see online what the grades are and so forth. So I think that's really important to try to talk about how people can address those kinds of issues and give them tools. When a student is on campus and if they're experiencing those kinds of issues, we try to spend a lot of time supporting the students and getting them involved in different student organizations and other sorts of activities where they can naturally talk with their peers about some of these things as well. And I think a lot of advice that students give one another in terms of relationships with families is really very important too, and probably much more innovative than some of the things that we can think of for them to do.
So we likely probably have some parents who are tuning in today, either because they work in student affairs, or they're just interested, or maybe they're watching in syndication. What advice would you like to give these parents about how to help and be a part of the process, but also navigate this transition? Brian, you want to start?
Yeah, I would first set the context that if college was easy, everyone would do it. And so it is not always easy. I think sometimes we confuse customer service and education. Our customer service functions should be fast and efficient. The ID should look good, the food should taste great, but learning is sometimes slow and hard. And it's a process, and to remind them that, especially if they're parents in transition, remind them that it is never more stressful than when they're transitioning in, and that's normal, and they just need that support. I would remind them that annoying significant other from high school will get broken up with around November. That's called the turkey drop. I stole that from Britt Andriata from UC Santa Barbara. And most importantly, to know that it is a transition for the parents as well, that it is that they may be going through transitions as well. If it's the last student in their home to move out, they may have certain feelings. If it's the first one to attend, they'll have different feelings. And to use us as resources, as sounding boards to sort of chat, and to trust themselves. They've done a great job parenting these students. They've worked hard, and that they should now, really trust their students that they have the tools to test out some of this stuff. Their values may change, their decisions may change, but as long as their students know that they're in their corner, that they're supporting them, that'll boost their confidence and help them be more successful.
Great.
Yeah, I think those are great perspectives. And the only additional one that I would add is we frequently talk about parents and with parents and remind them of experiences that they've had when they moved. And so to take another job or to go to another community, what that's like, and the kinds of things that they would like, and also to support those sorts of moves. But at the same time, to realize that it's a chance for people to become altogether different, and that many of the students that they'll be sending to us after a couple months or a year or so forth, will be different, much different than the people that they sent to us in the first place. And to respect that and to try to support it and to acknowledge it as best they can.
Great. So I mentioned earlier that we were going to talk specifically about FERPA, and so I'd love to hear what your all's thoughts are as far as best practices for sharing this information. So sometimes when parents arrive on our campus, it's the first time they've heard about FERPA. How do you break this news to them, and then also empower them and empower their students through that process? Paul, do you want to start?
Yeah, as I alluded to earlier, we're very direct, and we talk about FERPA, and it's a law, it's a policy that we all abide by, and give some of the historical, very quickly, of course, historical background for it, and then we talk about the fact that it does not inhibit, and it should not inhibit conversations, that we can talk to them about students, or more specifically, we can talk to them about situations. And then, of course, FERPA does not apply to their relationship between them and their students. They could always talk to their students and be direct in terms of what they want to know and what questions they want to ask, and have access to the grades and so forth. So we try to put FERPA in its appropriate context, and we also talk to parents about, well, you know, if you want to sign a release, this is how you go about doing it. So we try to be as candid and transparent about it as we possibly can, and at the same time say that, you know, we are available and we're always going to communicate with you and try to provide you with the best assistance that we can, even though it might not be specific to your student. So in no way should FERPA be an inhibiting consideration.
Yeah, I agree. I think it can be easy to just photocopy that flyer and hand it out, but I think we try to at least make it a step for them and remind them too. If your student signs this under duress, it's null and void. But that doesn't happen. I think a lot of times
sign it.
Explaining to them that, again, as Paul mentioned, it's very important to have this come from a relationship. And sure, if you have access to this information, or if your student gives you their login password, which probably happens more often than we would like, you'll get the grades. Right. But if you ask them those questions, rather than just, what did you get on that exam, maybe replace that question with, what's your favorite class? Who's your favorite professor? How are things doing with your roommate? Because, again, just having that access and having that information doesn't give you the whole picture on how your student's experience is going. And then understanding, too, that there has been such a hyper-focus through the No Child Left Behind generation, which this incoming class was probably in kindergarten when it was fully enacted. They've been used to that pressure of grades mattering, of these checkbox really mattering. And so it is acknowledging with your staff and your campus partners that this has meant a lot to these families and these students, especially getting into these competitive institutions. And again, as we mentioned before, always fleshing out the scenarios with these family members so that they can still understand the process, even if they don't have access to the answers right away.
Yeah. Kathy?
Heather, so we talk about guest access, which the students can set up so that the parents can see, I think, the basic information that parents want to know. So end of semester grades, what classes are you taking, making sure that bills are paid. But the other thing that we talk with parents about is that FERPA allows us an exemption based on a health and safety concern for a student. So we tell the parents, because we have a dean on call, if your student is transported to the hospital and we know about it, we will call you, even if it's 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. And I think a lot of times that puts them at ease, because I think their most important concern is the safety of their student. So, and if we tell them, if we're concerned about their student, if we feel like they're having some psychological challenges or things like that, and we're concerned, we will also call you at that point in time. And let you know and involve you in, looking at how can we best support your student. So I think after we say that we're going to talk with you if we're at that level of concern, they also, tend to feel better about that, and knowing that if we're really concerned or there's something really serious going on, we're going to tell them.
Yeah, great. So I know we talked about the helicopter parent. We've been spending a lot of time talking about overly involved or just involved parents. But there's also this label. I know all these labels. The dry cleaner parent, which I heard about a while ago, a parent who wants to drop their child off in August and have virtually no involvement at all within the process, but pick them up 4 years later, degree in hand, pressed, ready to go to work, make some money. How do you all work with and engage these types of parents?
I think a lot of this sometimes falls on the student as well. And so at New Student Orientation, we try to remind the students that their parents are going through some stuff too. So we try to also have the students bring their parents in. And, again, sometimes if we have especially students who are first generation and their parents may not see themselves as a part of this community to reach out. And so a lot of that happens on an individual basis. And again, trying to make sure that our resources and our information is disseminated in as many different ways as possible is really, really important. So even though there is a high proliferation of people from all income levels now that are on social media, that have smartphones, it's still important to really have that face-to-face. And so I think, again, when I see someone who may feel like they're on the margins at one of our orientation or transition programs or spring open house, really try to build an individual connection with that person. And again, remind the students, if you do pick up on this relationship as being a little bit more distant, to just clue them in, to remind them that they're thankful for their sacrifices and for helping them get to that point, and again, provide opportunities for them to see themselves represented here. But it is a challenge, and it's interesting because the other dynamic of that is we have a large percentage of our college students now move back home after graduation, and that feels like a failure natively to a lot of our institutions. But parents and students are actually telling us in a lot of survey data that they're okay with this. So that is another component of that picking up and coming back home that is very different from my experience. That would not have been on the table for me, but it's almost the norm now.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. And for parents, again, that's when we talk about how to be engaged, we really encourage this three-way kind of relationship. Some of the saddest things that I've ever dealt with in my career have to do with family members and parents, thinking that their students are going to graduate, and that's just not going to happen, or the student has never been enrolled, or something along those lines. So you have to have the relationship, and you have to encourage families and parents. It sounds contrary to what we're all have been concerned about with the helicopter notion and so forth. But if families are involved, then you minimize the chances of having those very, very difficult kinds of discussions after 4 or 5 years, when just based on the time clock, certain things should have happened.
Right. So for folks who don't work directly in orientation or work with parent and family programs, but are still in student affairs in some capacity on their campus, any best practices that you have for engaging with parents and specifically with students and helping them navigate that relationship? Kathy, do you want to start?
Sure. So I would say, one of the things, especially for the people that don't work as closely with parents as some of us do, is one of the things that makes a parents most angry when you're talking with them, even if you feel like you shouldn't be talking with them, is saying, I can't talk with you because of FERPA. So I would say to just take that out of your language. If a parent is calling you, you need to try and answer their questions as best as possible. And you can always talk about policy and procedure even if you can't share specific student information. And then I try, so first I talk with parents, please, let them know it's not appropriate to call a professor or an academic advisor. Sometimes they still do, but then I try to say, so if you are at that level of concern, why don't you get your student to go in, give the permission and then talk with that person together. If you feel like you really need to be involved, so that the student is also involved in the process. And then also sometimes I'll talk with parents about how do you coach your student to have these conversations, because it's intimidating sometimes to talk to a faculty member. So we kind of work, bringing the student into the process as much as possible, but not being outright rude to a parent and saying that you can't talk with them, because I think that's just not appropriate.
Yeah. Great. Paul or Brian, any other thoughts on that one?
Well, I think that's a wonderful approach. I also emphasize that there are resources available. When I'm lecturing to parents about all the resources that are available and our special approach and the desire to build relationships, I'll say to the parents that if their student needs to have a conversation with just an adult, that I would be delighted to take the student to lunch. And what this does is it helps the parents to understand that there are people here on this campus, there are resources that are really interested in their students and are going to try to do everything they can to be accessible So that, I think, eases some of that concern and that us versus them sort of perspective that sometimes people have.
Great. So we're almost at the end of our time today. Just wanted to close out with any final thoughts that you all would like to share, and final words on partnering with parents. Paul, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think, again, as I've been saying all along, this is a special relationship and a special generation. The new millennials have a lot of trust in families and in adults in general, and so we should take advantage of it and try to do everything we can to work with parents and families to help students to be more successful and to enjoy their experiences at the institution. So whether it's at orientation or through parent and family programs, all of those resources and other resources we should look to try to create to take advantage of the special relationship that students have these days with their families.
Yeah, I would add on to that it has never been more complex and challenging for students to apply to a college campus. It's never been more expensive. And that may be, just getting to the front door might be really hard for a lot of just people to do on their own. So having a support system is not necessarily a bad thing. And as Paul said, this is, I'm from Gen X, and we were like, no, we're not going to hang out with our parents. I love my parents. We hang out all the time now. But that was not the norm. And as Paul said, this is not necessarily a bad thing that we have more folks just reporting that I'm happy with my family being involved in my decision making, and that we just help equip those parents for when their students grow and evolve and change, but the relationship is still there. But parents can be great advocates. I think when we do stick it out and help parents come to a resolution, even if it's not an easy one, they will appreciate it and share that information with others and become advocates for your institution and your community.
Great. Kathy?
So I would say I always try to think about the fact that we all have the same goals. We want healthy, happy, successful graduates from our institution. The student wants that, the parent wants that, and as an institution and what we do, we want that too. So I think part of it is having that perspective that parents can be great partners with what we do, and part of my job is also fundraising with parents. So part of it is, it's important to build good relationships and have parents feel like they're connected to your university, because if you're doing any type of fund development with them, that's an important part of your relationship with that. And as all of us are looking, to try and do more development, it's an important aspect of what we do. So I think they're really valuable partners, and they have a powerful voice. There are often times when our administration comes to me and says, Kathy, we need a parent on this committee, we need representatives to talk about this, we want to hear at a Board of Regents meeting from a parent, and the Parent and Family Association. So people care about that voice on campus as well, and even with state legislators and things like that. So they can play a really significant role in partnering with what you want to do and the things you want to achieve on your campus.
Great. Well, I just want to thank all three of you. I thought this was a fabulous show today, very timely topic. And I really appreciate you all spending your afternoon or your morning if you're on the Pacific time zone with us today. And also thank you to this program sponsors and to ACPA again for hosting me today. Coming back on July 23rd, I will be back with Student Affairs Live. We're looking for a new co-host. And I'll be talking with a couple of folks about fraternities and sororities and concerns around hazing. So that will be the show topic on July 23rd. You can get reminders about that upcoming show and all of the other great shows that we have on Hired Live by subscribing to our newsletter. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, you can browse our archives and listen to past episodes, as well as subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. So once again, I'm Heather Shea Gasser, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Make it a great week. Thanks for watching Student Affairs Live.